Hello, we're rolling into another episode of the DRH show. As usual, I talk to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and well-being. Today, I'll be talking to a researcher from Loughborough University, Dr. Laura Jenkins. Thanks for joining me. I know it's a stressful time. That's why I'm really grateful that you're here to join me. Welcome here at the DRH show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. Dr. Jenkins, to kick this off, could you just share to us your trajectory in life? Tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yep, so I'm currently a teaching associate in psychology at Loughborough University. So it's part of my role to kind of directly teach students and to support students when they are doing their own research as well. I started off my educational background back up in Newcastle at Loughborough University. So I completed an undergraduate psychology degree, then progressed on to a Master's of Research, again in psychology. I then took a few months out just because I wasn't quite sure what I'd like to do. And that then led me on to a PhD because I was at the time helping one of the lecturers with some research. So it was a great opportunity then for me to begin a PhD as well. Mm-hmm. While I was doing my PhD, I was given the opportunity to teach. And this is where kind of one of my interests has come from with teaching. So while I was doing my own PhD research, I was looking at different areas of cognitive psychology. I was able to teach in loads of different areas of psychology, so developmental, cognitive, individual differences, and personality as well. Mm-hmm. And that's what sort of started my teaching career. Once I'd finished my PhD, I was fortunate enough to be offered a job down in Oxford, and I was classed as a psychology demonstrator. This is where kind of I developed more as a teacher. I focused more upon statistics at that point. So I gained a lot of knowledge about statistics and different research methods. And that in itself has kind of helped me today with teaching as well and supervising students. That contract was only very temporary. I knew that from the start. So once I'd finished down in Oxford, I then moved all the way back up to Strathclyde, and I took up a role as a teaching associate in psychology. So this was a very, very independent role. I kind of, again, looked after dissertation students in their own research. I took lectures and practical seminars. And once I'd finished at the University of Strathclyde, then progressed onto the role that I am in now at Loughborough University. And this is a role that I enjoy very much. It's a very, very good atmosphere to be in, very supportive, and I kind of do a mix of teach students and then support students with their own research as well. So I've currently got students studying areas of mental health. Some are studying areas of autism and memory as well. So what I do is, in terms of, I don't carry out my own independent research. I tend to support students now with their research. So I can kind of use the knowledge I've been taught throughout my education and then help the students with their education as well. And that's pretty much where I am at today.
Mm-hmm. And is that always something that you always wanted to do? Have you always dreamed of being an academic, or it's really something that you did not plan at all?
In all honesty, I didn't ever plan on going into academia at all. I'd planned on finishing my undergrad degree, working, and that was pretty much it. But then I came across a very interesting master's degree that then allowed me to progress into a more academic role, and I found it while I was doing my PhD. While I enjoyed the research side of it, I enjoyed the teaching side of it a lot more because I felt as well I was kind of making a difference to the students' education. So that's why I've kind of progressed more with teaching roles rather than the research-based roles. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at today, yes.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you actually have a lot of connection with your students. You do enjoy teaching. Yes. But before the lockdown crisis, how would you engage? How would you normally engage with your students?
Well, part of my role is to teach the students in a variety of areas of psychology. And my whole approach to teaching and supporting students is something called a Vygotskian approach. Mm-hmm. So this is where teacher does not directly give the students information. So teaching staff are designed to support students via a process called scaffolding.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Lev Vygotsky was a developmental psychologist, so his research was all about sort of classroom applications.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where my teaching approaches tend to stem from, because I've done a little bit developmental research myself. It's quite an interesting area that I do enjoy teaching, and it's good for me because then I can then apply that to a university setting as well. So what I do is I try and encourage students to become more deep learners. So instead of just giving students information that they're going to memorize for an exam, for example,
Mm-hmm.
we try and let the students know why they're doing certain tasks, you know, and how that then may apply outside of their degree. So in relation to jobs, for example, clinical psychology, different areas of business psychology and HR, for example. So when I'm teaching, before the COVID-19 crisis was upon us, I gave quite a large number of large cohort lectures. So 300 to 400 students in a room,
Mm-hmm.
all engaging with the lecture material. And what I would do is to try and engage the students a bit more is I would use a piece of software called Vvox.
Mm-hmm.
So Vvox is sort of a questionnaire software where you can present questions on the screen to students. And students can kind of get some immediate feedback upon different questions in psychology. But it's also good because students have got that face-to-face contact with a staff member. And then I can also see if the students are understanding those topics as well. So if there's a question that the students may not be as confident on, I can then straight away go over that information, and then also provide students with some further support online. With some of the modules that I currently teach, so I currently teach a practical psychology module, and this is one of the modules that does sort of rely heavily on face-to-face work with the students. So before the current crisis, what we would do is the students would be separated into groups of 20 to 30 students, and we would give the students practical activities that they could do in relation to different areas of research. We'd give them group tasks and individual tasks as well. So you can imagine now we are trying to think of different ways to engage the students without having that face-to-face contact. But before this crisis was happening, those methods really did work very well because students had their own online environment through different chat sessions and things like that, but they also got that face-to-face support from both myself and all of the other staff members at Loughborough University as well. So it's more about just engaging the students, trying to make sure that they are well supported with their education as well. But something like the psychology degree is one of those degrees that does, in my opinion, rely on quite a lot of face-to-face contact. So over the past few weeks, it has been quite difficult to manage that. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later on.
But what I'd like to explore more is that obviously there's a structure on how you deliver your lessons to your students, and you mentioned there's also an online component involved. But can you explain how you have adapted? Because right now it's predominantly online, although before you're also doing a bit of online engagement with your students. Now that it's predominantly online, how have you adapted with this changes that has been implemented?
So one of the biggest changes, as you've said, is trying to very quickly get everything online. So rather than having a lecture in a lecture theatre, what I've now been doing is pre-recording lectures. So as we are now having a conversation, I'd put up some slides on the computer screen. My voice would be recorded, and the students would then be able to go back in their own time and then have a look at that lecture. For some areas of psychology, that's absolutely fine. We've had no issues with that. But for some areas of psychology, in replacement of those practical workshops, I have had to use more sort of instant chat sessions and online seminars rather than those face-to-face ones. So what I tend to do is an hour or two a week is I will go online, I'll inform the students the times that I will be online, and I'm essentially sitting at the other end of the computer, answering questions that they have at that time point. hopefully after the Easter break, I'm going to try and run some more sort of, where possible, engaging seminars. So maybe have sort of 5 or 6 students log in at a time and give the students those practical activities that they may not be able to do independently. So essentially we're trying to replace those practical workshops with online materials where possible. What we do have to understand is that at this point in life, there's a load of worry and a load of concern out there. So what I tend to do is everything that I put online is normally not specific to a deadline. So students are not asked to kind of watch the lecture at a certain time point or complete the practical activities at a certain time point, because students will have their own worries at this point. And as staff, we need to have a little bit of compassion, a little bit of understanding that students will have their own issues that they are going through as well. So apart from the main pieces of coursework that do have deadlines, everything else I try to be fairly flexible with and just offer support to students where I can. So we have quite a good online learning environment at Loughborough. So everything is normally facilitated through there so that all the students can get the support where needed. If that's okay.
I really like, you know, how you have adapted, and I think it's also the university, if I'm not mistaken, who has, you know, initiated this, that you have to have like, you know, give a bit of a leeway to the students, because obviously
Yes.
these are very challenging times. These are very stressful times, even though, you know, like even without the pandemic, you know, going to university with all the coursework is really stressful, and then you add this situation, it even becomes more stressful. So I really like, you know, the initiative that you've got in place there. But I want to ask you, Dr. Jenkins, is now that you have kind of experienced, you know, teaching the traditional way and predominantly online teaching. So from a teaching standpoint, which do you prefer? Do you prefer online teaching or face-to-face teaching?
For me, it often depends upon what I'm teaching. So in one of my previous roles, I was teaching on an online master's degree. And that, for that degree, because we had students that were all over the world, we couldn't obviously have those face-to-face sort of classes and workshops. So from that point of view, it was the preference to have everything online. Because we were in different time zones as well, we needed to arrange appropriate times with the students. That really did work well, because a lot of students did those online master degrees because they had other commitments and they didn't want to be in that university environment. And obviously as staff, we again had to understand that, and it was quite nice to still speak to students who, you know, a lot of students were in India, some were in the UK, some were in America, and it was really, really good to engage with students that were sort of not directly on campus, just to see how students were progressing. In the situations where you do sort of a face-to-face undergraduate degree, that's where I tend to prefer a blended learning technique, so a mixture of the online community and also the face-to-face lectures. At the minute, although everything's online, we do have a reason for it. It's, you know, to protect the students, to protect the staff. And by allowing things to go online, we can then have a bit more of an understanding. So students can then obviously go through lectures in their own time. So it's, for me, I would edge on more of having face-to-face and online lectures rather than just face-to-face or just online lectures. Just because face-to-face lectures do give students a little bit more feedback, but at the same time, some students prefer those online communities that can do things in their own time. They can work their education around their lives as well. So for me, it's a little bit of both, if I'm honest.
I think it's really important that, you know, it works for, you know, we try to include as many elements as possible with our teaching, whether face-to-face or online. But me personally, if I can just share, I really prefer online teaching, and that's the reason why I struggled to find a university to do my PhD. I've applied to do a PhD, and it's only this year that I've managed to find a university that will do all of it online, because I don't want to go there even for just a week, because I've got other commitments. Some of my listeners is aware of the kind of work I do. I do a lot of work online on YouTube, managing PsychReg, and I can't give up all of that because um, that's my main source of earning, and
Yeah.
a traditional part-time PhD with with a lot of commuting doesn't work for me. So
No,
mm,
it's I can understand that way. Yeah. So when I did my PhD, I was recruiting participants face to face for memory
mm,
experiments. So for me, I kind of didn't have an option to do it online.
mm,
But if I was doing a PhD later on in life where I had different commitments or work commitments, such as yourself,
mm,
I think an online PhD would be quite a good option to do because it's not going to stop that engagement with people. You know,
mm,
you would still get support from teachers and lecturers. You'd still be able to talk to fellow students as well.
mm,
But I just for a PhD in my area, online wouldn't have been as possible.
mm.
But I think now it's quite good how things are starting to go a little bit more online. But at the same time, for me, I still do prefer some face-to-face contact. But that's just me as a person. It's it's not to say one degree's better than the other. It's just a case of my personal preference. I do sometimes prefer to talk to people face to face rather than online. It's just how I am.
Mm. I think there's also the factor of what level you're studying. If you're doing an
Yes,
undergraduate degree, I think it
yes,
makes more sense that you do a face-to-face
yes,
approach. Whereas if you become more of a mature learner, you would prefer online teaching because, like what I've said, you've got commitments, you're probably
yeah,
married, you've got children, you've got
yeah,
full-time work. So obviously you can't really squeeze in your studies with your other commitments.
yeah.
Now, what I'd love to ask you, Dr. Jenkins, is now that we're in the middle of this lockdown crisis, have you got
Yes.
any tips for students on how they can better manage their coursework, on top, of course, the other mental health issues that they might be experiencing as a result of this?
Yes. This kind of comes from also when I was doing my degree as well about things like time management.
Mm,
The three main things that I would suggest to students about how they can kind of manage themselves, workload versus non-workload, is firstly only kind of have short periods of work, so maybe 30 to 40 minutes at a time, and then get up for 5 minutes, move away from the computer. Um, Previous research has shown that people in general can only concentrate for 20 to 30 minutes at a time, and it's one of the reasons why in lectures especially, I tend to try and give students a little break, whether that's just an interactive activity. So it's the same when students are working at home. If they are listening to a recording of a lecture, possibly stop after 20 to 30 minutes. As I say, stand up, possibly go and have a drink of water, a cup of tea, just to move away from that working environment, because it's not good for mental health and even physical health to be sitting for sort of 7, 8 hours a day without regular breaks. So that at the minute, that's one of the main tips that I would suggest to students.
mm,
Um, the next thing would be to have a good balance of sort of work versus non-work. So at this point in a student's education, they will have a lot of coursework deadlines. They will be quite committed to progressing with their work. But at the same time, it's also important to have time away. So whether that's just a full weekend away, or half an hour to an hour during the day of kind of getting outside. I know at the minute we are a little bit restricted upon how long we can spend outside. But if students have back gardens, or they can just walk about outside for sort of 10, 15 minutes, that will then kind of help a student's concentration in terms of resuming concentration. Because I say after that 20 to 30-minute window, um, anybody, to be honest, not just students, may get distracted in themselves.
mm,
Another thing that I would suggest was try and have achievable goals during the week. So I know at this time of the year, students are progressing with revision, especially for exams. Um, so my suggestion would be is set achievable goals. So don't say, I'm going to revise one full module in a day. Chances are things like that are not going to be achievable goals. So if you maybe state, I'm going to look at lecture 1 today, lecture 2 tomorrow, and then a student will feel as though they have achieved something. It doesn't matter how small that thing is. If you set it as a goal and it's going to be achievable, it will hopefully make someone feel a little bit better about their achievements, instead of setting achievements that are not going to be physically possible, especially in the current climate when concentration may not be there. Students in particular may need a little bit of a break from studies, which is completely understandable at this point. So it's a mixture of just finding that work-life balance, really, and also making things achievable in terms of exam revision and coursework as well. And obviously, as staff, when I teach, I try and set the work that is achievable in the space of a week. So I don't kind of say to students, here's 4 hours worth of a lecture. I'll try and break that down a little bit more as well, so that students can then feel as though they have achieved something within the week as well.
And that's your excellent tips for students. Now, what about for teachers? Because you're teaching,
Yes.
so you obviously have adapted into this kind of new working environment. So what would you give to your fellow teachers?
So for anyone who's teaching, one of the main differences between teaching a few months ago and teaching now is that the students do not have that sort of face-to-face contact. So what I would kind of suggest to any member of staff is make PowerPoint slides very visually appealing. And when a student logs into an online learning environment, they will be mainly looking at those PowerPoint slides. And whereas in a lecture situation, a staff member would be able to explain, they'll be able to move about the room and engage students that way.
Are you using a specific type of software for making your slides, or is this just Microsoft PowerPoint?
I tend to just use Microsoft PowerPoint because in this climate, we're not 100% sure what the students have access to. So I'd never want to use a specialised piece of software that would require students to go away and download something completely different. When we do provide students with different activities, this is always through kind of the Loughborough online environment, so the students have access to that software anyway. What I tend to do is in my lectures, so my PowerPoint slides, is I'll just make them a little bit more visually appealing. So instead of having loads of writing on the screen, I'll maybe have a few more pictures, a few more diagrams about theories, rather than too many words. Because I think as a student, if you have a set of PowerPoint slides that is all words, straight away that may sort of stop a student from engaging. So by having a little bit more, colourful slides or some extra images in there, that will hopefully really help students. And sometimes seeing an image helps a student understand, rather than seeing sort of 5 or 6 different sentences on a screen. So for me, it's about making the PowerPoints more appealing. Similar to what I've just suggested to students, teaching staff also need a little bit break every now and again. So it's a case of when lectures are being recorded, so at Loughborough we tend to have 2-hour lecture slots. And if we were recording a 2-hour lecture, it's quite challenging for a staff member to concentrate for those 2 hours. We can edit our lectures and our lecture slides as well, so that it's good in that way. But what I tend to do is I will have short 20-minute recordings for students rather than a full 2-hour one, and I will ask the students to watch a series of maybe 20-minute lectures. So one of my kind of tips for staff is to try and record lectures that are not kind of overly too long, just because, again, after sort of 20 minutes, half an hour, students may sort of disengage a little bit. And it's also a similar case with staff, after 20 minutes or half an hour, sometimes we also need a little break, just to kind of regroup and to take a couple of minutes breather, just so we can then have 2 minutes away from the computer and then start recording the next set of lectures as well. I think it's important as another tip just to try and put yourselves in the shoes of students. So as staff members, we are trying to put everything online and be supportive of the students, but it's just about understanding that at this point, students' mental health, may, because of the worries and the anxieties that are out there, students' mental health may be not as good as it would be if students were in that face-to-face environment. Students may be requiring a little bit more support. So again, it's just about not setting deadlines that are really, really demanding at this point. So again, when I teach my psychology modules, I will give the students different tasks that they can do, but there's normally not a specific deadline. I'll just kind of say to the students, you know, it's suggested for this week, but just try and work through it as and when. So it's just about having possibly a little bit more of an understanding about how the students are receiving the information as well as us trying to provide sort of lectures and practical materials as well.
Now, on a personal level, what strategies have you used to keep your mental health healthy during remote working? Because even though you've experienced, blended mode of teaching, obviously
Yeah.
this is not the usual way that you teach. So this might be something new for you. So have you adapted any strategies in relation to this lockdown crisis?
What I tend to do, so I'm currently staying with my parents at the minute, so there's a few of us in the house, so it's often very difficult to find that working space. But what I've done at the minute is I've kind of set up a little desk in my parents' spare room. So when I'm working, I'll be in that room. But when I'm not working and I'm sort of relaxing a little bit more, I move away from that environment. I'll go downstairs, I'll watch some television. And for me, one of the key things that kind of keeps my mental health kind of okay at the minute is having sort of the time where I will be working, but also the time for breaks as well. Especially coming up to the times where we are recording lectures and we maybe have quite busy days where we have different meetings. It's trying to find that balance of working when we're supposed to work, but also potentially having a few minutes away from the computer as well. Alongside that, while we are a little bit restricted as to where we can go, I still like to get out in the garden, have a walk along the street, even just for 5 or 10 minutes a day, just so again I'm not kind of sitting in that working environment. If I was in the office, I would be working alongside several colleagues, so there'd be times where we are chatting and that we were kind of talking about work things and non-work related things. So for me as well, it's just about trying to keep in contact with colleagues and friends via those online environments such as Skype or Zoom, just so that I don't then feel isolated by not working in an office environment. So it's just about, for me, trying to find a balance of work and sort of more recreational activities, not kind of working for long lengths of time and having breaks in those, and also a mixture of getting outside, engaging with the family as well. And that's how I've been looking after myself over the past month while I've been working from home.
Brilliant. Now, just following up on that, Dr. Jenkins, you've done some research in the past on personality. So I'm just interested to know, do you think there's a certain personality type that could adapt well to the current situation? Because, why is it that some people seem to be born with the ability to overcome setbacks with relative ease, whereas there are some people who seem to be scrambling to increase their, shall we say, resilience during lockdown?
Yeah, so a lot of my research has used the Big Five personality theory from Costa and McGray, which looks at things like extroversion and neuroticism and agreeableness, and as well how open a person is. Now, this theory in general would suggest that an extroverted person is more sociable, they are more outgoing. So this theory may again suggest that a person who is extroverted may struggle with being isolated, but there's also a contrast to that. So it's not necessarily true that an extroverted person may struggle. An extroverted person may actually be able to find new and innovative ways of communicating with family and friends as well. So while the theory might suggest that an extroverted person will struggle, from personal experiences, if a person is more extroverted, then they may be more likely to sort of look for different software, engage with phone calls that include 5 and 6 different people, engage with people who they have possibly never met before. I know at the area where I live at the minute, we have different online groups where people can engage with each other. And for someone who would be more extroverted, they would possibly be more welcome to doing things like that. Whereas someone who was more introverted and who was more happy with socialising with only 1 or 2 people may struggle with things like that. Whereas the research would suggest that an introverted person would cope very well with today's situation. that actually might not be the case. A person who is more introverted may, they may also struggle as well, because they may just, again, try and sort of isolate themselves. They may not try and communicate with people if they're unsure of how to do so. They may not want to sort of ask for help when you're feeling a little bit lonely or not involved with people. Within this theory, one of the personality types or the personality traits that is concerned with sort of anxiety and fear is the neuroticism trait. So if someone scores highly on a neuroticism scale, it means that they are more anxious and more fearful in their daily lives. Now, for me, this is one thing that could kind of give us a little bit more information about how someone may be in isolation. So, for example, if someone is more anxious or more fearful, they may need a little bit more support while they are either isolated alone or sort of more isolated with family and friends. Now, today's climate will cause anxiety and fear in general to everyone. I'm sure there's quite a lot of people that are worried out there about, the current crisis that is going. So it's not necessarily people who score high on this personality trait. It could be people who are just anxious in general or more fearful in general. So although I've done quite a bit of personality research, I don't think there's one personality type or one personality trait that kind of defines how people will react to being isolated or, being in the situation that we are currently in. I think it's more down to what sort of support that people have. So, if you've got people who you can reach out to, then that is a good thing. If you haven't, then you may need to take the opportunity to sort of ask for help as well. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand. I think what you're trying to say is more than the factors, the availability of support, rather than the personality.
Yes.
And yeah,
Yes, exactly.
that makes sense, because it actually kind of resonates to me, because I'm an introvert, and most of on a good week I just work from home. But even though I'm quite used to this kind of arrangement, I still kind of struggling, because I really want to go out. I really want to. I really. I've been locked all day since, for God knows when, because I'm a freelancer, I work from home. But I just have limited friends, and most of them are in London, and I'm just dying to see people. I'm living with my husband right now, but sometimes it's just kind of get boring. Not that I'm bored with my husband, but you just you just want to meet a different people, because you've been spending 24 hours for the past 3 weeks, and it kind of sort of get repetitive. But I understand what you're trying to say, that I think it's a constellation of factors more than anything else. Now, of course, your research and personality is just one aspect of what you do, because if I'm not mistaken, at the core of what you do is actually you're doing research on visual working memory. Now, that sounds really a technical term, but if you could just give us a snapshot of your research area.
Yes. So when I was doing my PhD, as you said, it was focused more upon sort of visual working memory. So it's just how people memorize the visual elements of their daily lives. For my research, I did try to simplify it quite a lot. And I looked specifically at how people remembered different coloured squares and different shapes. And what I did is in my PhD is I looked at the differences between these. So do people have strategies for remembering different coloured squares? Or do people have strategies for remembering a different variety of shapes, so circles in comparisons to triangles, for example? And what I did is I looked at this in terms of children. So we looked at how children use these tasks and memorize the different shapes and the different colours. And then I used adults as well. And we actually found that people will remember sort of things where they can put verbal labels to them. So, for example, the squares, they could, if there was certain groups of colours, so let's just say red, blue and white, it would be sort of the Great British flag. People may remember those colours because they could put some verbal label to that. Whereas with the shapes, the different shapes, we only gave people these in 2 or 3 colours. So I think we had green triangles, blue circles, and red squares. So it was very, very difficult for people to kind of put some form of verbal label onto sort of the patterns that were presented on the screen. But what my research did suggest is that visual memory doesn't work alone. People will use their verbal memory in everyday life, so when they are remembering phone numbers, different colours. And one of the interesting things that we did do, or when I was doing my PhD, is I actually looked at how the brain reacts as well in relation to the different colours and the different shapes. And I did find that a person who uses their verbal memory a little bit more will use the frontal areas of their brain in comparison to if they are simply just looking at their colours as well. Now, if I was ever going to progress more with this, more with my research, if I ever wanted a change in career or a change in direction, I would then sort of apply this to a more ageing population. So how do people of an older age, so 60 plus, 70 plus, how do they remember these shapes in comparison to sort of the younger participants I did look at for my PhD? But I have published a couple of different papers, so looking at how you can disrupt memory. So how can you stop people from remembering those different shapes as well? And what we did is we put different pictures on the screen. We asked participants and people to do different tasks in the middle of the memory tasks. And we actually found it's quite easy to disrupt someone's memory. And that's in terms of everything that someone's trying to remember. So it didn't matter whether we had coloured shapes, whether we had different squares. If you ask people to do something in the middle of a task, it's quite easy to disrupt their memory. So for me, it still is quite an interesting area of research. Every year when I have dissertation students, I try and get at least one of my students on board with a memory task. I haven't been so successful this year. None of my students wanted to look at that area. But it's just how it goes. For me, it's an interesting area. Some people, don't enjoy areas of memory at all. I think in future, what I would like to do is so I've got 2 areas of research. I've got personality research and also memory research. I would like to combine those 2 at some point in the future. And I'll probably end up doing that by suggesting these areas to further students that I work with in the future. So, for example, how does someone's personality impact upon how much they remember or the types of shapes that they remember? What I have found, though, is that some of my students have tried to link memory to mental health as well. And obviously, I can't discuss certain things now because the students are in the middle of collecting data and things like that. But they are really, really interesting topics to study because you can see how a person's mental health can then sort of inhibit memory, or it can encourage memories of sort of different events. And that is quite an interesting area as well. It's how I can then combine areas that I'm interested in with also the areas that my students are interested in as well. So I would like to continue with that at some point in the future if I can.
And in your journey of doing research in personality and memory, have you come across with some myths? Let's say, for instance, a certain personality type is more predisposed to forgetting. Just any myths that you would like to address during this point.
I think it's more the myths along the lines of if someone has a more neurotic personality type, so they are more anxious and more fearful, that they are then sort of more forgetful. In terms of the research, this is absolutely not true. What you do find is that people who are more anxious, they will tend to remember the fine details of events and things that are going on more efficiently and more accurately than someone who is maybe not as anxious. And that is kind of one myth that's been out there since sort of the beginning of memory research, that sort of different personality types and different areas of mental health do impact memory. But for me, that's actually one of the areas that one of my students are currently looking at. So how, areas of health in general and also mental health are impacting upon memory. So it'll be good to try and have a look at that in more detail in the upcoming years as well.
And can you also share to us some science-backed ways to improve memory?
Yes, so there's a few ways in which you can improve memory. the first thing is to try and, so I discussed earlier about adding verbal labels to things.
Mm-hmm.
What you can do is you can improve your memory by adding these verbal labels, so giving meaning to things that you are trying to remember. So for example, if someone's trying to remember a phone number, for example, you could put the verbal label to that phone number that is, you know, a parent's phone number or a grandparent's phone number, and think sort of the logical sequence of the phone number in terms of the area code first, so that would be the geographical location, and then different sections of the phone number, but giving meaning to those numbers as well. This is in terms of kind of visual memory as well. So a lot of people will tend to remember faces that they have seen. Some of the research does suggest that people will incorrectly remember faces that they have seen. So they may see someone's face on the television and then think that they have actually met that person in real life. Again, it's just trying to see if you can put verbal labels and events to the time points and when you have maybe met that person, and to try and distinguish between when you have seen them and when you haven't seen them, for example. And then the third sort of thing would be to not try and remember too much in one go. So when I gave people, during my PhD, I gave people memory tasks. We would always ensure that these were very, very short memory tasks, just so that the participants weren't being asked to remember too many different things in one go, and so that we could then separate out which type of memory the participants were then using. Especially during one of the studies, when we tried to disrupt memory, we found that any type of sort of stimulus could disrupt memory. So if you were looking at pictures of squares, for example, just by simply asking a participant to repeat a number would be enough to disrupt memory. So it's a case of, when you are trying to remember things, minimize those distractions as well. So, you know, in terms of when students are doing revision, for example, you're trying to memorize the information that has been taught in lectures. Try and have a quiet area with limited disruptions and interference where possible, because this will really help boost memory. I think one of the final points is just sort of keep a healthy diet. The research has shown that if someone has a healthier diet, so fruit and vegetables, and eating things like fish and a variety of meat, that will help in terms of sort of mental functions in general and cognitions. Whereas someone who maybe lives off sort of more junk food and chocolate and high sugary foods, that will impact sort of mental functions and cognitions, and in general their memory will decline quite easy. So it's a case of have a healthy diet, try to only remember small amounts at a time. For example, when you are revising, and where possible, try and put meaning to what you are looking at in terms of what you are trying to remember, and those should really, really help improve memory.
I really like your tips, especially what you said about, you know, putting labels to things that you're trying to remember. And I just kind of realized it's actually applicable for people who are trying to learn English or any other language. I don't know if you're aware of IPA, you know, like those phonemes, and they do have symbols, and it's quite difficult to remember that because they do look different from the actual letters. So I think it really makes sense if you're trying to associate that with the word that you're trying to remember. I don't know if I'm making sense, but you know, those symbols. I think it's really helpful if you do it that way. If you're trying to picture something as a symbol for that word, for that phoneme. Now, of course, you do research on personality, you do research on memory, and of course, I'm also aware that you do research on statistics anxiety. You teach a lot of statistics. So can you give us some tips for those who are anxious about statistics? And I'm one of those people, so I'm not really good with numbers. And, you know, when you're trying to do further degree, whether it's MSc or PhD, you can't really get away with studying statistics. So what's your advice for people like me?
I think my main advice would be try not to look at the complicated things first. So when we teach statistics, in all of the universities that I've worked in, it's not just specific to Loughborough, is we teach undergraduate statistics, really, really basic at first. So we start at kind of maybe school or A level, and then we work the students up towards kind of the more hardcore statistics, as some students would suggest. But it's a case of trying to explain statistics simply to the students. So what I tend to do is, in the past when I've taught statistics, I've referred students to different support websites, things with, again, a lot of images on them, so that students can see the reasons behind why they are doing what they are doing. So, for example, if we are teaching students about looking at group differences, so looking at the differences between, older people and younger people, for example, we would then encourage students to look at different graphs associated with those statistics, so that the students can then try and understand from a visual perspective what it means for the statistics. So don't just present the students with numbers. When I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was very, very anxious around statistics. I really didn't enjoy it. I'll quite happily admit that. It wasn't an area of psychology that I understood well. And it wasn't until I got towards my master's degree that I had a really good statistics teacher, and he was able to kind of show me sort of different support websites, different ways of looking at statistics. So what we do is, as much as we give the students textbooks that they can read, is I'll always try and so in one of the previous roles that I've had, is I provided students with a short 5-minute recording on those different statistical techniques, and kind of explain things from a non-psychology perspective. So I try to explain things as simply as possible. So what different numbers mean and how you then get to those different numbers, but without making it too technical. So especially when someone goes into their first year of a psychology degree, I don't think a lot of students realise how heavily statistics it is.
Mm-hmm.
And even for me, when I was doing my degree, I didn't understand that either. And what we try to do now is we try to show the students the reasons behind those statistics. So are you looking at relationships between different variables? So whether, age would have a relationship with, anxiety or depression, for example. When we look at the techniques behind those, rather than just saying to the students, here's the numbers, this is what you do. For me, so when we've shown students different softwares, so we have a very, very complex piece of software called SPSS that we use within psychology. What I did is, in one of my previous roles, is I made very, very short videos and showed the students how to use that software in a video. So that was kind of, from my perspective, because I had taught the students throughout the year, I tried to kind of, I made those videos at the level where I thought the students will understand, and I wouldn't kind of go straight into the complex terms. It will be sort of, again, more of the visual methods behind it. So show the students the pictures of the numbers first, rather than giving them a load of statistics that they might not understand. So it's just about trying to start from the basics, use pictures where possible, so graphs to explain different results. But yeah, it's just a case of trying not to overcomplicate statistics, because students do need to understand them, but they also need to be supported in a way that they can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So by giving a student something very, very complex to do when we haven't taught them the basics is not good in terms of the student. And it's also not good for staff, because then we're not approaching it at the right level. So we tend to start from basics, loads of pictures, try and explain things as simply as possible, and that hopefully should help with sort of levels of anxiety as well. It's more about just breaking up the statistics rather than giving the students everything in one go. And especially with the statistics that I've been involved with this year, it has really helped the students as well, and they seem to be a lot more receptive when there are different engaging activities associated with the statistics. So when we don't just provide those 2-hour lectures, when we actually give the students activities and workshops, so that students can then have a go for themselves and get some support when they may need a little bit extra help with things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think also it's also important that you actually realize why you're doing a certain type of statistics. It's not just, you know,
Yes.
computing for the numbers, but there's an underlying reason behind those
Yes.
computation. But those are
Yes.
really useful tips. Now, this is my final question to you.
Yeah.
For those who want to explore more about your line of research, where can we
Yes.
find excellent resources? Have you got any recommendations? And of course, for those who want to be your under your research supervision, where can we learn more about your work?
For me, if you want to find more about my research, about the research that I've done in the past,
Hmm.
is simply just type my name into Google,
Hmm.
because it'll bring up a list of my publications and the areas of research that I've been helping with and assisting with over the past few years.
Hmm.
If someone is more interested in memory in general, then things like the Journal of Cognition are really, really good, because this journal has a wide variety of different articles on cognition in general. So it's not just memory based, you know, it's other areas of cognition as well that might be of interest. We also have different websites that we do direct our students to. So we've got things like LEDs. So if a student was struggling to understand statistics, for example, we have websites called LED statistics.
Hmm.
So again, just type it into Google, and these are really, really good because, as you said, they give reasons behind different statistical techniques. They use real world examples, so different areas of cognition, different areas of psychology. So it's websites such as that that do help students, that are more academic websites and more academic resources as well.
I just want to put out on the description. I think that website is LAERD, if I'm right.
Yes, yes, that is the website. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think I've come across with that while I was doing my MSc.
yeah.
And also, obviously, those who want to learn more about your work, they can look you up on Google, but are you also on social media?
Yes, I'm on Twitter.
Hmm.
I think my Twitter handle is Laura JKS 2015.
Hmm.
And I'm also on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Um, I'm not quite sure where else I am. Those are the three main ones that I tend to use, but I tend to use Twitter quite a lot. So when I publish things, they go on Twitter. You know, activities that I do in terms of, you know, writing and blog posts as well, they all go on Twitter. So anyone who's would like to know a bit more information about me, please follow my Twitter profile, and you'll get to know a little bit more about me, because my academic profile's on there, but also more personal information about, you know, the non-academic activities that I do as well.
Okay, I'll put all of those links on the description
Okay.
box. And also, of course, Dr. Laura Jenkins is also one of the correspondent for PsychReg. So he has a standalone profile, and he's also an
Yeah.
editorial member of PsychReg Journal of Psychology. And I'm really grateful for all the support that you've done for PsychReg and for the publication. Well, Dr. Jenkins, it's really have been a fascinating and useful. We've learned a lot of useful tips, especially about statistics, anxiety, and of
Yeah.
course, managing our mental health in light of the lockdown. But unfortunately, our time is up.
That's
Um,
okay.
yeah. Thank you for sharing with us your expertise, and I look forward to hearing more about your work.
That's okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Okay.